Hello, beautiful sisters. I'm Joanne Amaya, and alongside my dear sister Achintya Devi, I'm one of the co-creatresses of Priestesses of the Moon. Priestesses of the Moon is an exquisite, phenomenal, transformational 8-week online initiation training into the womanly arts and moon mysteries. And we begin this incredible journey on October 14th, and part of the celebration of this, we're coming to you with reminders of how to live in alignment with Mother Earth and the Moon. So I'm incredibly honored to be here with you today in celebration of the Autumn Equinox. And I know that we have a lot of women as part of our global sisterhood who live in the Southern Hemisphere. And you're actually just about to step into Spring Equinox. So I want to acknowledge and honor you and know that all of us are holding sacred space on this wheel of life. That we actually each need each other to hold this balance for the earth. So wherever you live, we honor you and the tide of nature happening around you. And for those of us who are in the Northern Hemisphere, we're about to step into Autumn Equinox. And so maybe you're feeling the energies of this, the transition, coupled with Mercury retrograde and our movement to the full moon eclipse in Aries on Sunday. So there's a lot happening in the cosmos. And so perhaps you're feeling big shifts, big insights, realizations, transformations, joys, fears. And so it's important for us to remember, because sometimes we can get caught here, it's important to remember that there's so much happening that's larger than us, that's actually moving and living through us. So Achintya shared in her video about what's happening right before the autumn equinox, during that portal of the actual equinox, and the week after. And what I want to share with you is a little bit more about what happens after that time, so that you can move through each of these phases with really sacred tools to support you. So for autumn, according to Chinese medicine, autumn is the time of grief and loss. And we can see it really all around us in nature. We notice that the days are getting shorter. Wherever you live, perhaps you might be seeing that the leaves are starting to change color. Maybe the leaves have already fallen to the earth. So we're seeing this process of grief and loss. The loss of summer, the loss of play, the loss of adventure, as we start to go more inward. And each of these transitions and seasons have such powerful roles in how we live our lives. So we really honor this time. And perhaps you're noticing some of this transition and maybe some of this grief and loss in your life already, because we're reflections of nature. And so oftentimes it's very obvious when we're going to experience grief or loss, right? So when we lose a beloved, of course, we know we're going to feel tremendous grief. When there's a parting of ways in a relationship, there's going to be loss. So we know that there's times when we're really going to feel that heartache and that pain and that rupture, really, that it can feel like in our hearts. But there's also a lot of other times that we feel grief and loss that are actually joyful. So as a woman's walking the path into motherhood during pregnancy, she may feel grief at what she's leaving behind, at the loss of her identity that she knows of. You might feel grief or loss as your business really starts to expand and more is asked of you, or you realize that you absolutely have to show up every day in congruency. So we actually can feel it at all times, and grief and loss is part of the circle of life. And again, it's all about acknowledging it and mourning it and allowing it to move through us whenever it's present. So today I want to share with you some flower essences, because again, it's important to feel our emotions, to allow them to come forward, and to have ways that we can move through them so that we can continue walking towards our desires. We can live in resonance with our heart. So one thing that's just really important to remember, just like a little morsel of reminder for you, is that always, 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 from the ashes, from the devastation, from that deep heartache that you feel, always comes empowerment and enrapture. We see it in nature, right? So the leaves fall to the earth, they get taken up in the soil, the plant takes that in, and in the spring the buds arrive and the green and the flowers. It's exactly what happens to us if we have tools to keep us walking forward so we don't get stuck anywhere. So for those of you who know me, you know that I love flower essences, and I love sharing their medicine because I think they're invaluable for us. So there's 3 flowers that I'm going to share with you today. And again, from my heart, I really hope that these support you. The first one is Bleeding Heart. And Bleeding Heart, you know, she works the way that she sounds. She helps when your heart feels like it's bleeding. So in times when there's great sorrow, the loss of a loved one, a traumatic event where you've separated from somebody, Bleeding Heart just helps the process of the heart to continue to bleed, to continue to feel, so that it gets to healing. And if you've ever seen the flowers, you'll know they're little hearts. So there's this stem, and all along the stem are these teeny tiny little flowers, and they're hanging to the earth. It's like they're bowing to you for your heart healing. The second flower essence is Black Currant, and Black Currant is actually one of my most favorites because she has so many different ways that you can use her. But if you're feeling grief or loss, if you are feeling it because you don't know who you are, you don't know how to be who you are, you can't even sit down and write your desires because you're not sure what your desires are, Black Currant is incredible for that. Black Currant whispers to you over and over and over, you exist. You exist. You exist. And just simply because you exist, you're allowed to be whoever it is that you want to be. You're allowed to shine your gifts. You're allowed to proclaim yourself and express yourself. So if there's any issues in your past regarding feeling abandoned or rejected, and it's showing up in your life, and in your work, in your health, in your relationships, where you're, again, feeling abandoned, rejected, it starts to question our sense of self. So Black Currant just whispers, you exist. You exist. And merely because you exist, we get to celebrate your existence, and you get to have these things that you're really desiring. And then lastly, we have Motherwort. And so perhaps you've heard me speak about Motherwort because she's invaluable for women. Motherwort helps to create healthy and appropriate boundaries. So when we're talking about grief or loss, sometimes we need to create boundaries for us to actually feel deeply in our heart, for us to create sacred space, to nourish ourselves, to support ourselves, to feel fully what's actually happening. Motherwort helps us to prioritize ourselves so that we get to feel whatever it is. So we have Bleeding Heart, Black Currant, Motherwort. There are so many flower essences that can support you, and I also hope that these plant medicines really support you if there's any grief happening. One thing I do want to say is if there is grief, if there is loss, that's sort of at the surface, right? And if we can follow the thread to figure out where that grief is coming from, that's actually where healing can arise. So is the grief coming from abandonment, rejection, fear of the unknown, the loss of a loved one, because you haven't created space to nurture yourself? Then you get to follow the threads and find the flower essences that are exactly perfect for helping your heart to heal. So I would love to hear from you when you use these, as they really are inviting you back to your truest nature. They're not about bypassing the emotions you're feeling. They're really about embracing them and healing whatever needs to be healed. Please make sure to watch Achintia's video if you haven't already. She's going to support you with an equinox ritual and womb practice that's going to help you feel the fullness of who you are as a woman and how to use these energies. And I also want to remind you that enrollment is currently open for Priestesses of the Moon, our 8-week online journey. Really, it's a journey of remembrance. It's a remembrance of our body connection, our sexual expression, our emotional liberation, our desires, how we nourish ourselves, and of course, the journey into sisterhood. So early priestess registration ends midnight Pacific time on September 30th, and after that, registration will be open, but tuition will rise. So we would love to have you on this journey back to the empowered feminine, back to your truest self, and we so look forward to walking this sacred path into being a priestess of the moon. Sending so much love.